I think we are live. Hey guys, what's going on? Thanks
Indeed,
for
indeed, indeed.
let's go. Thanks for jumping on, guys. So today I got Randy on here, my partner. We are going to be discussing and settling the debate of whether or not 1 to 4 units is better investment than a 5+ unit apartment complex. So we're going to be diving into the pros and cons of each one and talking about, and we have both. We have hundreds of units. We have over 500 million in assets under management, and a lot of single family duplexes all the way up to large hundreds of unit deals. So we're going to be breaking down exactly what the pros and cons of each are, and hopefully exactly where you're at in your investing journey. Basically, we've scaled to this level, so obviously we are focused on bigger deals now, and but for a beginner. So hopefully you get a lot of value out of this. By the end of this, I want every single person walking away knowing exactly what you should do next based on your situation. So let's dive in. Thanks for joining, Randy.
Indeed, indeed, man. Good to be here. And, great topic. You want to get moving on the right foot. It's the less time traveling down the wrong path or a bifurcated path, the better off you are.
That's right. Yeah. So let's just jump straight into 1 to 4 units. All right. So 1 to 4 units. The pros. Okay. A couple quick points. You first you can get approved for a loan easier, right? Loan requirements are not as hard to pass for smaller deals versus bigger deals. Now, there's options for people who want to go into bigger deals that can't qualify, but right now that is just real, right? A single family, small multifamily deal is going to be a lot easier to get approved for. All right, and you typically get better terms for those loans as well, right? Because you can make it a small, personal loan or personal, mortgage, single family home loan, right? So it's going to be a lot better terms, easier to get approved for.
But let me just throw in there and add to it, you do have to have the income that also is supportive of that too. You know what I
Right.
mean? So like if you're like, hey man, I got, money under the table, this, that, and the other, like you're going to struggle because ultimately they're going to be looking at you to say, what kind of income do you have? So you've got to have a decent either business income or W-2 income that can help you support the loan. So that's real.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, they're going to be easier to find, right? There's more inventory for single family homes, right? Or smaller deals, right? There's not as much inventory for big deals. So they're going to be easier to find. Obviously, in my opinion, you got to also think about leverage for your time going into it and like what that deal can produce. But if you want to go the single family route, it's going to be easier to find. And then also, lastly, on the pros, there's no SEC requirements. If you don't know what that is, the Securities Exchange Commission governs capital raising and bringing money together to invest in bigger deals, which if you don't have the capital for a down payment for a big deal, then you would need them involved. But for single family, obviously you can partner with somebody. You don't have to set it up in a typical, private investment security, right? So you can set it up where it's a JV partner, somebody brings the money, and you can just kind of do a small, partnership, right? But obviously, for SEC attorneys, you'd have to bring them in if you're raising capital. You don't have to do that with single family. So that's going to be easy.
Yeah, so like, just an example, if you're buying like a duplex or a quadplex or a triplex and it's, 250, 350,000, whatever the number is, depending on the area you're in, and then your bank or lenders loaning you, 80%, on 300K, they're giving you, $240,000, if you will, and then you've got to bring in that 60,000. So like Jonathan's saying, you got a partner that's coming in or maybe two partners that are coming in and the three of you, buy the deal. That's part of a reality that can be easily set up and easily done, and potentially a lot less money. And depending on the lender, you may get a lender that's a local bank you're working with, and they'll, many of those banks even today will still loan up to 80%. So again, in that
Right.
same example of, uh, 300 unit or 300,000 or 200,000 duplex, they're going to loan you $160,000. So now you just need 40,000. You can structure also the seller to pay closing costs, right? So you say, okay, hey, instead of 200,000, I'm going to give you 210 and you pay all the closing costs. And so now you've cut that cash out or 300,000 or 200.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and so let's get into some of the cons of single family rentals. Okay, and 1 to 4 units. All right. So first off, with personal loan, with taking out loans for each of these deals, you're typically capped around your first 10 loans. And what happens then is then you're required to get a business loan, right? So a business loan would ideally be good for large deals, but once you have to get a business loan, they don't actually look too favorably on smaller deals. So you're actually going to get worse terms if you want to scale past 10, loans or 10 deals in terms of financing. Okay, they typically want to do bigger deals when it comes to business loans. So that's one thing. And then secondly, if for those wanting to replace your income, quickly, maybe you're wanting to double what you're currently making, maybe you're wanting to make a massive impact on your net worth or your income, you want to replace your income in 1 to 3 years, it's going to take a lot more work on the single family side, a lot more risk, a lot of deals have to go right for you to actually make substantial amount of income. Okay, and then in fact, I have a slide. Let me
Share those
that
screens.
slide, and we'll kind of
Well,
dive in.
think about just as Jonathan's saying that, like, again, you figure out, okay, I'm going to make X dollars off of this duplex or this single family home. And then, like he's saying, you got to get so many of those, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 to really be able to equal making kind of a move the needle impact in replacing your income or adding to your income. And again, it's not, you can't just say, oh, a rule of thumb, you're going to make this off this, because every market's got different parameters, different rents, different cost structures, all like that. But even if it was that you were making a couple $100 a door off of each of those units, again, and you bought two duplexes, you're making an additional 800 a month, you know what I mean, or 1,000 a month. So it's like, now to some people that's going to be big, other people it's like it's not replacing my income, and for most people, again, that's not replacing their income, you know what I mean. So it's like you just
Yeah,
have to really take that into account.
yeah, and so another point I have on here is minimal upside potential, right? So if you're really thinking about growing with the ability to increase the value of the property substantially in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, that's not happening a whole lot in terms of single family. It is based on the market evaluation, but in single family, you're capped at what they call the comps, right? The comparables in the area versus multifamily. And we can talk about that in a second. Larger deals, you're typically basing it off the income of the property, right? So you can grow with not much cap, right? And then there's a low multiplication factor, right? So you can't multiply the units. You only have 1 unit or 4 units, right? And then typically absent property manager, you're still the point person when things go wrong, middle of the night issues, cops show up or whatever that is, right? You're still the person that they're calling. And so Randy, you can cut me off anytime, but
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I remember in the early days, getting a phone call, not necessarily the cops, but like, the plumbing's out and blah, blah, blah. And, 10 o'clock at night, I'm going over to this duplex with, like a snake
right.
machine. And my wife's like, what in God's green earth are you doing? And I'm like, on some level, asking myself, man, what the heck are you doing here? But,
Yeah,
and that's true and that's real. I mean, that was, God, I don't know, was it 90? I don't know, 98, 90, 99, or I don't know, somewhere in there, 2000. So it was a long time ago.
right. Yeah.
But I say that because like, look, it's real. And then the other thing is like some people will go, oh, but I made so much money in this house. Look, you benefited from appreciation that took place in the market in the last maybe 1 to 3 years, right? But like in most markets, you're not going to see like a significant increase in a short time period of 12 to 36 months, as Jonathan said. Now, again, for those of you that were in Florida or this area or Texas, and then you own something 3 years ago, yeah, it jumped in value, or stuff out on the beach here in Florida, in the last 3 years prior to this year 25, yeah, values jumped dramatically, you know what I mean? But that's just a market appreciation that's not really inside of your control. And so, you want to, as we'll talk about in the others, with the 5 units, you have more control as to how you can force the appreciation.
Right, exactly. And then the next point is it's dependent on your personal credit and cash. Now, look, you can bring in people to fund the deal, but it's just not as advantageous to most investors to put money in a small deal that's not going to appreciate very much or not going to create as much income recurring, right? And so it's typically dependent upon your credit, and then less doors equals more risk, right? So you're either 100% occupied or you're 100% vacant. Yeah, if somebody goes out of your single family, then all of a sudden your income's gone. You're not paying the bills, right? And then, like I've already said, if you want to replace your income quickly, yeah, you need, if you really do the math, you take out a loan, you do all the rehab, you do everything on the deal, and you need 15, 20 plus to make any substantial income on the deal.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, most people I'd seen in that region, if you're making 2 to 400, like
right,
that's what I mean. Like somebody that's making 4 or 500 a house, I'd be like, first of all, let me check your math, because most of the time you're not accounting for various maintenance and this, that, and the other, or downtime. Tenant moves out and their property's absent for 45 days. Well, you just lost 2 months worth of rent. Like,
right.
so anyway, yeah, it's not wrong that you'd need a bunch of rentals to get to any type of real substantial replacement value.
Exactly, exactly. And then let's talk about multifamily, large 5+ unit deals. I got a slide. This is what we believe for us is the right option. Now, again, this may not be for you. This may not be the solution or the right types of properties for you, but for us it is. But that's because we've
Well,
calculated the right, it's leveraging our time better.
Well, and let me just say this. A lot of times people would say that because they don't know. And that's one of the
Right.
value or the benefits of the, REI community, is that you have an opportunity to learn. And once you learn, now you've got this knowledge. That knowledge becomes power to help you overcome those variables that you don't know. And so that's a key component for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So, look, you have greater upside potential value add. They call them appreciation multipliers. This is for 5+ units, okay? And typically we even say let's start with 10+ units because, 5 is still kind of getting close to that headache type of property,
Well,
right?
let me share a quick example on this where this is real life deal we're looking at and working on. 92 units. They all have washer dryer. So you can go in and buy washer dryer to install and then rent them out, right? And so again, on at $50 a unit, that is on 92 units, it's $4,600 a month in additional money that's coming in. So over the course of 12 months, that's $55,200. So if you were to look at that in a market like Florida or some areas of Georgia where it's, call it 6.25 cap right now on a well stabilized operating property, call it 6.25. That increases your value by $883,000. That's
Big
big
bucks.
money. And the reality is you can buy the stackable washer dryer on a smaller scale basis, the 24-inch cycle size, for probably just about $1,000. So let's call it, $100,000 you spend to buy the units. And again, I get you don't have 100 grand, but I'm talking about this bigger property. You install those, and over the course of 12 months, by now cycling through the lease roll with all the people, and all the people over 12 to 18 months adopting the washer dryer program, you've now increased the value of your property by over $850,000.
Yeah.
And you spent 100,000. That's a net gain of 750. That's real money that when you would go to sell the property, the buyer is now valuing that additional 55,000 of NOI, and they're valuing it at $750,000 or more.
Wow. Just made you 800 something thousand dollars
I
right
mean, so
there.
a net gain of $750,000. That's powerful.
Yeah.
And that's real. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's the power of what can be done with, little increments in, you know, property asset management.
Exactly. So let's keep going here. Greater upside potential. So what Randy's saying, here's a quick math example for that. Every dollar of income equals $12.50 if it's an 8% cap rate. So just to simplify cap rate, and we have videos on cap rate. If you want to go check it out on our channel, we share about how to understand cap rate and everything. But just from a high level, it's basically, if you were to go value a business, it'd be valued based on the profit, right? Based on the income, the net operating income. How much does it actually producing? And then you get a multiple, you times that by a multiple, and that multiple is based on, factors involving the market conditions, factors involving how the business is ran, how what type of property is, what asset class is it, right? Well, the multiple is the same thing as the cap rate, right? So each market determines what kind of cap rate you can get based on the property and the condition of the property. So in a lot of, just say nationwide, maybe it's 6.5%, right? Well, in this situation, it's 8%. So you take, you add $1 to your bottom line, you divide that by 8%, and you get $12.50. This is why people get into multifamily. This is why the apartments is so wild, because now Randy just said he did one move, and could immediately go sell his property for $880,000 profit, right? He could immediately do that with just doing one move that increased $50 per unit, right? So that's just on a basic, and I'll share that in just a second. But look, you can rapidly scale your net worth with just one transaction versus 15, 20, 30, right? And then like I already told you, it's professionally managed. You have better property management. You can hire better people, on-site management, right? And so, you're not having to answer that call in the middle of the night, right? You have somebody doing that for you. And then less risk because, look, the occupancy is more consistent. There's diversification, the economies of scale, right? So you have a lot more, and this is what attracts investors. So if you have no money, right, you think about, how can I attract investors? Well, these types of properties, investors are thinking are safer. They have way more upside, way better upside potential in terms of my money invested. And as long as they can trust you, you have something that people want, right? So it's going to be a lot easier to be able to raise capital on a deal like this, right? So economies of scale, occupancy, you have 10% of your renters move out, you still have people paying your bills.
Yeah. And, that's one of the things too, is you look at certain areas, and you're studying, these are things that are be able to be evaluated beforehand. You can look at that submarket you're looking in. You can see that the other properties in the area are all operating at about, 92%. You can see that they're reasonably full all the time. And so that you would strive to do a better job, but you've at least got a good benchmark to see that there's strong demand in the area. Some areas it's 95%. The other thing on the, forced appreciation is what the terminology is on that, equity multiplier in cap rate. And so you have in advance, you're able to look at the project and say, okay, if I renovate the units and make them nicer, now the rent could be moved from, 800 to 1,000 or 1,200, and again, you can also see what are the competitors in the area charging, right? If everybody else is charging 1,200 because they're nicer and newer and maybe got some amenities, you could renovate yours and easily get 1125 or 1150. Maybe you got a 40 unit deal or 50 unit deal that doesn't really have amenities, like the other place down the road's got a pool and a gym, but by offering is just as nice of interior and $50 cheaper, you're going to attract and appeal to people because that $50 that they're saving there, they're paying their cell phone bill with. So again, these are all things you can look at in advance and then plan what could you do. So that's where you have that value proposition up front and have a reasonable expectation of what you're able to do in terms of creating value over a period of time, 1, 2, 3 years. And it's not as much driven by the hope of just market appreciation.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, exactly. So, and then no money out of pocket needed. Again, you can do this with smaller deals, but it's much easier on bigger deals. You can use syndications, which, look, that's just a fancy term for pulling money together, right? Mm-hmm. All that is pulling money together to invest in an asset, right? Don't get scared by that term. Loan sponsor, you can bring, if you don't qualify for the loan, which here's the 3 criteria, guys, you got to have 10% of the loan amount, in liquid, right? You got to be 10% liquid of the loan amount. and then you got to have a net worth equal to the loan amount, and you got to have experience. Right now, you can divide that up and have somebody with experience and then somebody with the financial qualifications. But if you don't have those three qualifications, you can bring somebody in. That's a beautiful thing about larger deals. And then creative financing, obviously, you can leverage that, sellers financing their property to you. Now, I want to share with you a thing, but let's get into the cons real quick of apartment investing. So, first, it's you got to have good systems. So it's going to be harder to run. It's a bigger ship to turn, right? It's going to be harder to run a deal, a large deal as an owner operator when you're not living there. You're having to control it. You can't just run to the property anytime, right? You've got a management company in place, so you can't just implement things quickly. You've got to have systems in place to actually scale.
Well, and I would precede that even with, a lot of times we said, I've mentioned before about the knowledge, you know what I mean? The knowledge and the understanding is what is a preventative measure for people, where it's like, I'm not sure. And it's like, well, because you don't have the full understanding of it. And that's where, again, being a part of the community, being a part of other people that are already doing it, now you've got that to offset that. And then, as Jonathan said too, with that knowledge, and then now coupled together with proper systems and processes, you're able to then better be able to execute at that scale. If you don't, then, again, then people are just kind of winging it. Like that's not as, that's a
Yeah.
tough approach for sure.
Yeah. And then secondly is going to be there's not as much inventory, right? Larger deals are harder to find. So it does take more of your time to lock one of these deals down. It's not like buying one single family or two or three small or two, duplex or triplex, right? You can probably find those quicker. You can lock them in quicker. The due diligence, the contract period is shorter. But you got to think about that from a leverage perspective.
Yeah. It's, and I would say this with everything, though, there's the trade-off. And so, again, even where you look at that, you're putting in more time, but then your payoff is bigger,
Right.
right? You putting in more, energy and effort to learn, but then again, the results are more dramatic or difference makers in your life.
Yeah.
So with that, that's part of the thing that it requires you to be willing to make an investment in yourself in order to be able to move forward at that level.
Yeah, and look, guys, like when I first got into larger deals, I had probably five or six single family homes and Airbnbs, and then I partnered with my partner Larry, who is on the show normally. He, is doing bigger deals, and I'm seeing, man, he's making 10, 15, 20 times the amount on one deal that I can make off 10 to 20 deals, right? And so it's like, man, I'm in the wrong vehicle. He's making $1 million, $2 million in 12, 15 months, off one deal. And I'm over here doing, a few single family. I'm like, man, I'm in the wrong vehicle. So, I don't get too excited, wake up and see a 5 unit deal in my inbox, right? It's not that exciting. What's that going to do? Right? It's going to do a little bit, but it's not going to be enough to get me excited. But then I see a 50, 100 unit deal that makes sense. And you look at closing a 50, 100 unit deal, that's something you're going to get excited about because that can bring massive shift in your finances and in your life, in your portfolio. So that's our take on it. That's the cons I would say is just, it takes a little bit more time on due diligence, underwriting. You need to spend a few more hours making sure it's a good deal. You need to, it's going to take a little bit more effort to find a good deal because there's less inventory. But like Randy said, it's the trade-off, right? It's the fact that you're going to see a much bigger potential in it. So, and then, yeah, go ahead, Randy.
Well, I'm just saying, absolutely. I mean, I would just say I'd echo that with anything in life. The more that you are able to put into something, the more you get out. It's the law of sowing and reaping. And so, again, um, I wish I would tell you, hey, Slick Willie with like bing, bam, boom, it's going to be easy peasy, one, two, three, Z. But it's like, that's not true in life, right? Like
Yeah.
the best things require some effort and then it's a more fruitful experience. And so that's the same with this endeavor here.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I'll conclude with this, guys. $1 million math. If you are somebody who wants to create $1 million quickly, I want to share a breakdown. Let's do the math on what it would actually take to hit $1 million. Let's suppose, like we talked about earlier, the market cap rate 6.5%. Your deal's valued based off of 6.5% of your your income divided by 6.5%. Well, you would need 9 units. If you had a 9 unit deal, you would have to increase the rent per unit $602 to make $1 million. All right. So you can do that through, like Randy said, putting washer and dryers in there, increasing the income somewhere, but you've got to increase the income $602 extra dollars if you have a 9 unit deal to make $1 million.
Per unit, per unit.
Yeah, per unit. So that's 9 times 602, and then you need six. So that's divided by 6.5% gives you $1 million, right? And then you would do it times 12. So 9 units times $602 per month per unit times 12 months. It gives you your annual, return increase. You divide that by 6.5%, you get $1 million, right? You do 15 units, you got to increase it $361, right, to get $1 million. You do 32 units, you need 169, which that's maybe more reasonable, right?
Yeah, so just real quick, interjecting there. Think about this again. You're taking, on the first example, your rents are $800. You got to take the rent to $1,400.
Right.
That's a big difference, right? And now that area may not support that. Now, maybe it's in a high demand area and you could rehab it up and put in, granite countertops and stainless steel and make it look super nice, or whatever the case may be, and get that rent. But I mean, that's a big jump from 800 to 1,400.
And it's not realistic. Like that's
not for most. Not for most.
Just so you understand, like, that this $169 increase, that might be a little bit more realistic, right? But 600 or 361, that's at least 361 is going to happen.
That's monster. That's monster. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and again, we've done thousands of units, and like, again, if you're able to move it, and there's some we've been able to, buy it and the rents were $850 and you could move it to $1,150, $1,200. And that's because we got a great deal on it. It was, not been moved with the market. The market had outstripped it. But by and large, most properties, it's, $150 to $250 would be a normal range of where you'd be able to experience value add increase of the rents alone. So that's a much more feasible scenario at 32 at 169.
And then you go up and you go 48 units. I just need to increase it $112, right? 88 units, now we're at $61. And then, 100 units, it's just a quick $54 increase, like Randy said, right? So that's nothing, but people don't even sweat that, right? They're just attribute that to inflation, So $54 is, you can see how with economies of scale, things get a lot more lucrative. $1 million is a lot easier. And here's reality, a typical situation, we might leave room for $125 increase in the rents. We find a deal that's way below market value. We come in there, we fix it up, make it nice, add in washer and dryer. 125 should be pretty attainable. Well, that's $2.3 million if you did that on 100 units. So just to give you context, guys, this is how we think about it, and I hope that helps you guys. So, Randy, did you have anything else?
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. I mean, I would just encourage you, look, if you're not familiar, this is great that you spend the time getting familiar, and then you want to take the steps to begin to learn more, because as you learn more, then you're going to be, ready to move forward and act. Praise God.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So guys, if you are someone who is looking to be a part of a group that is taking down deals and doing big stuff together, we do have a mastermind. Would love to see if that's a good fit for you. I think we have a link below where you can jump on a call with our team and see if it might be something that would benefit you. We're going to be pretty honest on that call. We don't bring just anybody in. We're going to be pretty honest to see if it's actually a good move for you and your current situation. But definitely feel free to jump on that call, totally free. And they can kind of break down, what we do and how it works. But anyway, God bless you guys. Hope you got some value from it. Have a great day.
Have an awesome